A feeling is a feeling. Pain does not become no pain unless it is no longer pain. It is much more painful to suffer when you do not want to. To want suffering for the sake of it is an oxymoronic statement, because it implies fulfillment. The nature of consciousness is motivation and reward. You make someone hurt to get them to react. That is the crudest function. I think it goes so far as to say that pain is something intrinsically either we want to avoid or we have been programmed to avoid, fundamentally, at the very least. I know that certain pains are required for a greater reward. What I mean is an ultimate sense of avoidance. Work is so we will someday take pleasure in not working. These facts, I believe, alone make life silly for the sake of itself. No thing, I believe, is good enough for the sake of itself. Not man, not ego, art, or other forms of creativity. You can look in the sky at night, away from the city lights, and feel no wonder and be at ease that we may be the only ones. Horror of horrors. There is another. The job that is conditional is not ended with us. If pain did not motivate consciousness, would be useless to DNA for replication. We have evolved up until this point precisely because it has worked. Like Mendham has said, the universe threw up on itself by allowing us the faculties of critical thought, logic. It was a blind, unintelligent force that brought us here and gamed us for no purpose, just a chemical, biological process, the function of replication for the sake of it. All else go extinct that do not reproduce. Most have gone non-deliberately, but we can go for ourselves now out of dignity and respect for suffering, the greatest opportunity. This is some more theoretical thought. I've annotated some passageways where I've seen the word bad used, and I'll probably give my own expression of what I think bad means. Bad. Avoidance motivator in an ultimate, if not immediate, reactionary sense. Basically, when I think of probably the most crudest function of a nerve is when you zap a nerve, it twitches, and it's involuntary. So maybe on the most fundamental level, suffering is completely involuntary, simply by the fact that nerves twitch and you are not twitching the nerve. Secondary use for bad that I've seen is deficit in the universe. So this is kind of a bit of a strange, maybe a strange separation from just badness being an experience. Because what is the deficit if experience itself is no longer in the universe? Is it irreversible? Suffering affects the universe because it's something and not nothing. Consciousness seems to be something entirely different than the rest of the unknown universe. The brain synthesizes it. So those are some notes I took. Basically, I'm just saying, when you're dead, the real I'm asking what the deficit actually is in regards to when suffering is put out. So, what that means. And another term for bad is just basically a severity of pain, kind of pain in and of itself. That's my thinking. I think when someone says it's good that bad didn't happen, what they're really referring to is the notion in their head that makes them feel good that they recognize that bad didn't happen. Really, badness, the asymmetry to me is just this fact that life creates badness, and the very best ideal situation is a neutral. So all it means is that life being here is bad, and life not being here is not bad. It's just the notion in your head that when you prevent something, you say, oh, that was a relief. That's the good. So, but obviously, having harm is a harm, and having no harm is just zero. So you have to argue for an actual good in and of itself that isn't just a alleviation of badness or prevention of it in that sense. So when I think of badness and when suffering is put out, I think of the immediate circumstance. So the immediate circumstances, there are other consciousnesses in this apparent reality, and just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's there. Likewise, like you can't examine your own consciousness through a microscope and look at it beyond the direct experience. So I think it would be very bad to assume that your consciousness is the only consciousness, because you can't even dissect it for yourself. And so I think it would be very bad to assume that you are the only one. But when badness is put out of the universe, when consciousness ends, when someone dies, I would say the bad of that event, that you recognize that someone, was raped, and they suffered horribly, and then they were murdered afterwards. I think the bad after that fact, beyond their direct experience that happened, is the fact that you recognize that it happened, and you say, I never want that to be here again. To me, that is the mattering, that is the purpose. That is the effect. It's because I recognize it and say I never want that to happen again. I'm not saying that the experience itself didn't matter. I'm saying the after effect, after the death. That to me is the effect, the badness afterwards. But based on the immediate circumstance alone, I would say badness is entirely sufficient to end it. Just on the immediate circumstance alone, let alone everything that has ever happened on planet Earth, and as far as we know in the known universe. So that, I wanted to clarify some of those arguments. So the most important thing to acknowledge is that life is inherently flawed unless under the most pristine conditions. If there is a good, you could argue to maximize it, but first it has to be clearly defined like known bad is. Now you have to argue that the good is incremental in accumulation and isn't just immediate. Or if it is immediate, that you would have to argue for the good in the first place. Because you could make preposterous arguments like what I think this thing is objectively good, and all we have to do is have more of it and then it'll justify all the suffering. But I think you would have to define a good, and I don't think there is a defined good. So assess the situation logically, honestly, and fairly, please. If you could maximize goodness in that immediate circumstance, how would it compare to the worst horror of that circumstance? Could you say it is actually good enough to justify it? Is it truly good to justify the little harm, quote unquote, left over, or to get there and find out? Could you look in those persons' beings' face and tell them their suffering is worth this goodness you have proclaimed? My analogy. One drop of poison in a pure vat or reservoir of water would make it unsafe for drinking. It will probably survive, but why necessitate it in the first place? The need for the water and the drop of poison in the one, and or few or many who will suffer and die horribly? ? So, these are just some of the ideas I've been thinking about, and I have some more here. So the other stuff was probably the most important to this video, so now I'm probably going to get into more theoretical and or psychological stuff. Obviously, thinking and experience are required to acknowledge a problem in the first place. How you live, being and doing, is different than how you describe life through analysis and critical thought. Both are important, though. Sacrifice and devotion versus impulsiveness and overthinking. Stress. When to let go versus holding on. Just some psychological stuff. I'm going through some notes here. Pleasure in the process versus pleasure in being able to say enough. What's next can go on perpetually, but can desire outweigh pain perpetually? Can no rest until the grave be desired? I look at it as the rise and climb. When you reach the top, will you ask for more, or can you even imagine enough? What is enough? Can you desire your ideal on all levels? So this is the hell thought experiment that I like to think about when I think about pushing through lots of bullshit, and why no one ever does anything for the sake of pain. You can say they're masochists and stuff like that, so you can say they enjoy pain, but what I think is happening is that they're getting a greater relief from inflicting pain deliberately on themselves, psychologically or through some other thing. I myself have held my breath. I would just exhale and let no air be in my lungs, and I would get the feeling of suffocation. So I would suffocate myself, and then when I finally breathe, I get this great sense of relief. It's very painful going through this like you're suffocating. And I try to hold it for as long as possible without taking in that deep breath, because the longer I hold it, it creates like this euphoria if you hold it long enough, because your body has like this I forget the words, endogenous response, or endorphins happen, I'm not sure, I think it's endogenous. So it's like the body kind of wakes up and gives you this euphoric feeling when you finally breathe, because it feels like you're suffocating. So I kind of look at masochism like that. It's kind of like you get this greater reward from inflicting pain on yourself deliberately, either psychologically or like the breathing thing. You inflict this feeling of suffocation so you can get this relief, because it's kind of like dying almost. When you get the relief that you didn't die, that the process of dying didn't happen, it's actually really rewarding. But try not to be a Sisyphus, please, because you can actually be addicting to be Sisyphus, believe it or not. You can get addicted to the rise and climb of things rather than any point to the rise and climb. So you can be really good at climbing out of pits, but there's no necessary point in getting back in the pit. And so I think like athletes are probably maybe an example, like just that constant kind of like what's next, how far can I push myself kind of thing. Or even a worse example would be like just like getting back in the pit almost deliberately, because you're just kind of obsessed with climbing out of it, because it gives you that kind of pride. I conquered, I triumphed. So I think what would be more productive is perpetual motion. So if you can basically propel yourself as limitlessly, theoretically. So this is the hell thought experiment. Pain can be pushed through perpetually, through infinite severity. This is my theoretical hypothesis. Non-reaction to pain as a notion of accomplishment, valuing of self over reacting to pressure from environment and conditions of well-being. What else are you going to do? Eternal punishment and self-pity? No reward besides a notion of accomplishment. All you need, grit and spit. Sameness despite horror is the accomplishment. Pride if God does not give up his punishment. Hope in hell is the release of punishment that God can choose. Why have no humans demonstrated this thoroughly? It is much more painful to suffer because you do not want to. Hell is eternal punishment that cannot be clearly acknowledged, since infinite anything is incomprehensible, let alone infinite suffering. The thought experiment only works because it is forced and or fantasy. So I like to think about that sometimes, because it is theoretically possible to have perpetual motion. It's just no one does it because no one wants to. It's much more painful to suffer because you don't want to, right? Like if I don't want to go outside and go running for 30 minutes right now, it's probably going to be much more painful if I do, right? And so it's kind of this, you have to be honest with yourself, as well as intellectually honest about the actual benefits beyond the immediate circumstance. So when I think about hell, I think, well, what do you got in hell? You got self, you got your thoughts, you got your feelings, this sense of self, even if there is no self, just this sameness, just I'm not going to give pain anything by reacting to it. I value myself more than I value reacting to the pain. Not necessarily that the pain isn't bad, just that I value this sense of self, even if there is no self, more than I value reacting to the pain impulsively and self-pity. Stuff like that. So I think in hell that would be the only motivation. That's the notion of accomplishment. Just that notion that's all you got. So it's like, what else are you gonna do? Just perpetual motion. I call that the hope in hell. Yeah, so I think that covers a lot of it. So I hope you enjoyed. Yes. I mean, there's more stuff I can talk about. I've made videos on my other channels. Yeah. I have Josiah S. Cooper. That's just my personal channel. I have Anomic Individual 87 or 78. That's just more purely antinatalism, ethalism stuff, I think. More so. Philosophy dubs mostly, that's what it was, at least when I was on medication for 2 years. That's what I did mostly on that channel. I didn't show my face for about that long. So I just did philosophy videos when I could. And then there's Evolus and Nihilus. So this one's just kind of like personal, but kind of anti-nihilism, ethalism, just dark stuff mostly. Yeah. So I'm reading through some more notes to see if I have anything left to say. I know this could be a long video. I don't know, I just wanted to cover some of this stuff. I've written a lot about it. I made some other videos that I didn't post because I wasn't totally sure if I thought it was worth it. I mean, there's some fundamental questions you can ask, like what consciousness actually is, and like, I don't know. I'm just for the sake of argument, I'm giving that consciousness is something in this apparent reality, that it's as much an apparent thing as anything else is an apparent thing, but maybe just more in its own way. Yeah, I'm looking through some arguments. Obviously, I wrote some stuff here. So, value is invisible until you sample it. Xerox. Experience it by your own brain. Cannot be observed otherwise. Microscope looking in on consciousness. Value is a real event. Something, not nothing, synthesized by the brain. If the above statements are both claims and are true, one cannot further access or legitimize their truth. It is no longer an assertion that can be proven right or wrong with absolute certainty. Value has been isolated to its own field. So, obviously, I'm just giving it for the sake of the argument here, but that alone, I still have my intuitive argument rather than entirely technical argument. So, just based on, consciousness in our entire context for anything. So I want to take it seriously, and I think other people should too. And I still think badness is an experience, a feeling is a feeling. I think, shoving, eating an ashtray of cigarettes would probably, and not doing that and making this video instead, is probably a pretty big difference. So I think that's kind of the anti-futility argument, anti-nihilist argument, even still, even if you don't want to call it a thing. I mean, you don't really need it to be a thing, even if it's just a feeling is a feeling. You can't really deny your experience. A feeling is a feeling. I mean, does it need to be a technical matter thing? I don't think it's so. Because I have other arguments. I could go even deeper and say, nothing exists, but a feeling is a feeling and no thing is no thing. So, do you really need a thing to make something significant in this context, in this apparent reality? I don't think so. Do you need it to be examined by a microscope to realize that swallowing an ashtray of ash and cigarettes is probably a big difference from what I'm doing right now? And that it's like intrinsically pain is something that we want to avoid, or at least have been programmed to avoid fundamentally. I think that's pretty freaking significant. This is more just technical stuff I like to talk about, because I want to be truthful as possible. Yeah, I'm looking through some notes. Alright. I'm going back through some notes. You can probably stop the video now if you can probably see if it's ending. Alright. Alright. I think, yeah. I think that's it. Suffering is suffering. Yes. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Better to do your own thing than conform to the system. Comfort or conform. Freedom and death. Thank you for watching / listening.